The small town of Pine Ridge was no stranger to snow, but this storm was something else entirely. Weather forecasters had been warning about it for days. The blizzard of the century, they called it. Most folks had the good sense to stay home, stock up on food, and wait it out. But not everyone had that choice. Mike Taylor stood at the wide front windows of his diner, watching as the world disappeared under a blanket of white. The Crossroads Diner wasn't anything fancy, just a simple place with good food and better coffee that Mike had poured his heart and soul into for nearly 20 years. It sat at the junction where the county road met the highway, making it the last stop before miles of nothing but trees and hills. "You should head home, Mike," said Rosie, his longtime cook, as she untied her apron. "Nobody's going to be out in this mess, not if they've got any sense." Mike smiled and shook his head. "You go on. Your grandkids need you more than this place does right now. I'll lock up in a bit." But as Rosie and the rest of his small staff bundled up and carefully made their way to their cars, Mike had no intention of closing. His father's words echoed in his mind, something he'd heard countless times growing up. "Son, a warm light in a cold world might be the only thing someone needs to make it through." Those weren't just words to Mike. When he was just a boy, his father's truck had broken down during a bad winter storm. A small diner much like his own had stayed open late, giving his dad shelter until help could arrive. Mike never forgot that story. As the afternoon faded into evening, the snow fell harder. The radio on the counter crackled with urgent warnings. Road closures, whiteout conditions, state of emergency. The governor was asking everyone to stay off the roads. Mike turned up the heat and put on a fresh pot of coffee. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. It sounded angry, like it was trying to find a way in. The diner's neon sign buzzed and flickered against the gathering darkness, casting a red and blue glow across the snow-covered parking lot. Other than that, there wasn't a light to be seen for miles. Mike's phone buzzed with a message from his daughter. "Dad, please tell me you're not still at the diner." He smiled as he typed back, "Just for a little while longer, baby girl." "You're impossible. The roads are terrible. Sheriff Tom says they've closed the highway." "I know. Don't worry about your old man." Mike put his phone away and went about his evening routine, finding comfort in the familiar tasks. Wiping down the counters, checking the supplies, making sure everything was ready for tomorrow, assuming the roads would be clear enough for anyone to come in. By 8 o'clock, the electricity flickered once, twice, then steadied. The whole town might lose power before morning. Mike was glad. He'd insisted on keeping the old generator when the previous owner wanted to get rid of it. Some things were worth holding on to, even if they seemed outdated. The booth in the far corner had always been Mike's favorite spot. From there, he could see the entire diner and both roads leading to it. He sat with a mug of coffee, warming his hands around it as he watched the snow pile up against the door. The weathered leather seat creaked as he settled in, just as it had for thousands of customers over the years. Outside, the snow swirled and danced in the headlights of his old pickup truck, the only vehicle in the lot. The storm showed no signs of letting up. If anything, it was getting worse. Most people would call him foolish for staying open. His ex-wife certainly would. But Mike knew something they didn't. On nights like this, when the world went quiet, and white, strange things could happen. People could get caught out in the storm. Cars broke down. Plans went wrong. And sometimes, all it took was one place with its lights still on to make all the difference. The radio kept playing softly in the background, old soul and blues that reminded him of Sunday afternoons in his grandmother's kitchen. He hummed along to Ray Charles as he checked his watch. 9:30 now. Maybe Rosie was right. Maybe nobody was coming tonight. Just as he was considering making up the small cot in his office for the night, his headlights swept across the windows, catching the falling snow in their glow. But these weren't his truck's headlights. They were moving, coming down the road at a crawl. Mike set down his coffee and moved closer to the window, squinting into the darkness. It was hard to make out at first, just a shape darker than the night, around it. Then the distinctive red and white emergency lights cut through the snow. An ambulance. It was moving too slowly, like it was struggling to stay on the road. Mike's heart beat faster as he watched it fishtail slightly, then recover. 10 yards from the diner's lot, the ambulance's wheels hit a patch of black ice hidden beneath the fresh snow. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. The ambulance slid sideways, its back end swinging around until it was perpendicular to the road. Then, with a sickening lurch, it slid off the shoulder and into the shallow ditch that ran alongside the highway. Mike was moving before he even realized it, grabbing his heavy coat from the hook by the door. The cold hit him like a physical blow as he stepped outside, the wind driving icy needles into any exposed skin. The snow was already past his ankles, soaking through his jeans as he waded toward the stranded vehicle. The ambulance's headlights cut eerie tunnels through the falling snow, and its emergency lights painted the whole scene in pulses of red. As Mike approached, he could see the driver inside, frantically trying to rock the vehicle free, but the wheels just spun uselessly, digging deeper into the snow and mud. Mike's breath formed clouds in the freezing air as he reached the driver's side door and knocked. When the window rolled down, he found himself face to face with a young paramedic whose expression quickly shifted from alarm to relief. "Thank God," she said, her voice nearly lost in the howling wind. "We've got a patient in cardiac distress. We need to get to County General, but our radio's dead and there's no cell service in this storm." Mike nodded, already thinking through what needed to be done. "You're not getting out with those wheels, but I've got something that might help." He gestured toward the glowing diner. "First, let's get your patient somewhere warm." As they worked to carefully move the elderly patient from the ambulance, Mike felt a sense of purpose wash over him. This was exactly why he'd stayed open. This was why that light in the window mattered. The night was just beginning, and it would be long and difficult. But Mike Taylor had never been one to back down from a challenge, especially when lives were on the line. The wind cut through Mike's jacket like it wasn't even there, as he helped the paramedics carefully move their patient from the stranded ambulance. The elderly man, wrapped in blankets, was barely conscious, his breathing labored. The female paramedic introduced herself as Lisa, while her partner, a tall man with worried eyes, said his name was David. Together they carried their patient through the blinding snow toward the warm glow of the Crossroads Diner. "His name is Walter," Lisa shouted over the howling wind. 78 years old, possible heart attack. We were taking him to County General when the storm got worse." Mike pushed open the diner door with his back, holding it against the wind, as they maneuvered Walter inside. The sudden warmth made their glasses fog up immediately. They settled Walter on a booth that Mike quickly converted into a makeshift bed by pushing 2 tables aside. "I've got a space heater in the back," Mike said, already moving toward his office. "We'll keep him warm." David was checking Walter's vital signs while Lisa tried the radio on her shoulder again. Nothing but static came through. She shook her head in frustration. "Cell towers must be down too," she said, showing Mike her phone with no signal bars. "We're completely cut off." Mike returned with the space heater and an armful of clean tablecloths that could serve as extra blankets. He plugged in the heater near Walter and adjusted it to point toward the elderly man. "He needs a hospital," David said, his voice tight with professional concern. "The medication we have will only stabilize him temporarily." Mike looked out the window at the worsening storm. The ambulance's emergency lights still pulsed through the curtain of white, but they seemed dimmer now, like the storm was trying to swallow them too. "How far is County General from here?" Mike asked. "About 15 miles, Lisa replied. "But it might as well be 1,000 in these conditions." The 3 of them stood in silence for a moment, the gravity of the situation sinking in. Walter's breathing was shallow, his skin pale and clammy. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, marking each precious passing minute. Mike rubbed his chin, feeling the day's stubble. He wasn't one to give up easily. 20 years ago, when people said a black man couldn't make a success of a diner in this part of the country, he'd proved them wrong. When his wife left and took their savings, saying the diner would fail within a year, he'd worked double shifts to keep it going. When the big chain restaurant opened up on the highway and everyone said it would put him out of business, his loyal customers had kept coming back for his famous apple pie and the way he remembered everyone's name. "I've got something that might help," Mike finally said. "My old tractor. It's in the shed out back." David looked up from checking Walter's pulse. A tractor? It's not much to look at, but it's got power. My grandfather's Ford 8N, built like a tank. If we can get a chain on that ambulance, we might be able to pull it back on the road. Lisa's expression changed from despair to cautious hope. You think it would work in this weather? Mike was already reaching for his coat again. Only one. Way to find out. David, you stay with Walter. Lisa, I could use an extra pair of hands. Outside, the cold was even more brutal than before. The wind had picked up, driving the snow horizontally. Mike led the way around the back of the diner, using his phone's flashlight to illuminate the path to a small metal shed. His boots crunched through the fresh snow, leaving deep footprints that were filled almost immediately by the falling snow. The shed door was partially blocked by a snowdrift. Mike and Lisa pushed against it until it gave way with a groan of rusty hinges. Inside, covered with a tarp, sat Mike's pride and joy, the old blue tractor his grandfather had taught him to drive when he was just 12 years old. Will it start? Lisa asked, her teeth chattering. Mike patted the tractor's hood affectionately. She's never let me down before. He climbed up into the seat and turned the key. The engine coughed and sputtered, struggling in the cold. Mike adjusted the choke, murmuring encouragement as if the tractor could hear him. On the third try, the engine roared to life, belching a cloud of exhaust into the frigid air. Find the chains, Mike shouted over the engine noise, pointing to the wall where several heavy chains hung on hooks. We'll need the longest one. Lisa grabbed the chains while Mike carefully backed the tractor out of the shed. The massive rear tires cut through the snow with ease. Mike felt a surge of gratitude for his grandfather's insistence on keeping the old machine in good repair. Maintenance matters, boy, his grandfather used to say. Take care of your tools, and they'll take care of you when you need them most. Getting to the ambulance was slow going. The tractor plowed through the deepening snow, creating a path as it went. Lisa walked alongside, carrying the heavy chains over her shoulder. By the time they reached the stranded vehicle, they were both covered in snow, their eyelashes frosted white. The ambulance had settled deeper into the ditch, its rear wheels completely off the ground. This would be tricky. Mike cut the tractor's engine so they could hear each other. We need to dig out around the wheels first, he explained. Then find something solid to hook onto underneath. They had no proper shovels, just a small emergency kit from the ambulance. Using their hands and the small folding shovel from the kit, they began to clear away snow from around the sunken vehicle. The wind seemed determined to undo their work, filling in the areas they'd just cleared. Mike's fingers grew numb despite his gloves. His back ached from bending over in the cold, but he thought of Walter lying in his diner fighting for his life and kept digging. Lisa worked just as hard beside him, her determination evident in the set of her jaw. At one point, she lost her footing and slid partway into the ditch. Mike caught her arm, pulling her back up. Thanks, she said, brushing snow from her uniform. I usually spend my shifts inside the ambulance, not digging it out. And I usually just serve coffee, Mike replied with a tired smile. Guess we're both learning new skills tonight. After what seemed like hours but was probably only 40 minutes, they had cleared enough space to work with. Mike lay on his stomach in the snow, reaching under the ambulance to find a secure attachment point for the chain. His fingers, stiff with cold, fumbled with the heavy links. Almost got it, he grunted, straining to connect the hook to the ambulance's frame. Just a little more. With a satisfying click, the chain was secured. Mike climbed back onto the tractor, while Lisa stood a safe distance away, ready to guide him. The engine roared in the quiet night as Mike carefully took up the slack in the chain. This was the moment of truth. If they couldn't free the ambulance, Walter's chances would grow slimmer by the minute. Mike said a quick prayer, then gradually increased the tractor's power. The chain went taut, stretching like a steel rope between the two vehicles. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, with a groan of protesting metal and a spray of mud and snow, the ambulance began to move. The old tractor strained against the weight of the ambulance, its engine growling in protest. Mike gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white with pressure and cold. He could feel the rear wheels of the tractor beginning to spin, losing traction in the snow. For a terrifying moment, he thought they might both end up stuck. More power! Lisa shouted from where she stood watching the chain. It's starting to move. Mike pressed down harder on the gas pedal. The tractor's engine roared louder, belching black smoke into the night air. Then suddenly there was a lurch as the ambulance broke free from the frozen grip of the ditch. It slid upward in a shower of mud and ice, its front wheels finally finding the edge of the road. You did it! Lisa's voice carried over the storm, her face breaking into a relieved smile. Keep pulling. With agonizing slowness, Mike guided the tractor forward, dragging the ambulance fully onto the roadway. Once all four wheels were back on relatively solid ground, he cut the engine and jumped down. His legs felt wobbly from the cold and tension. Lisa was already running toward the diner to tell David the good news. Mike followed more slowly, checking the ambulance for damage as he passed. Thankfully, other than being caked with mud and snow, it seemed intact. But getting it free was only the first step in a journey that still seemed impossible. Inside the diner, the warmth hit him like a physical thing. Mike stomped snow from his boots and peeled off his frozen gloves. His fingers were red and stiff, barely able to bend. David looked up from where he was checking Walter's blood pressure. How is he? Mike asked, moving closer to the makeshift bed. David's face was grim. Not good. His pressure's dropping. We need to get him to the hospital, soon, or... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Lisa was already gathering their medical equipment. The ambulance is free. We should go now while we still can. The road's completely covered, Mike warned. You won't make it a mile in this weather, especially with the highway closed. The three of them stood in silence, the only sounds coming from the howling wind outside and Walter's labored breathing. The old man's face was ashen, a sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the cold. Mike rubbed his chin, thinking, what if I lead the way with the tractor? Clear a path for you to follow? David and Lisa exchanged glances. How far could you go? David asked. At least to the main highway. It's about 2 miles from here. The state plows might have come through there by now. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all they had. David nodded slowly. If we could just get to the highway, then let's do it, Lisa said with determination. We don't have any other options. Moving Walter back to the ambulance was even harder than bringing him in had been. The wind seemed stronger now, driving ice particles that stung any exposed skin. Mike held the diner door open against the gale as David and Lisa carefully carried their patient out. Once Walter was secured inside the ambulance, Mike returned to his tractor. His body ached with cold and exhaustion, but there was no time to rest. Lives were on the line. He thought briefly of his own warm bed miles away in town and pushed the thought aside. This was where he needed to be. The tractor started more easily this time, its engine already warm. Mike positioned it in front of the ambulance and began to move forward slowly. In his side mirror, he could see the ambulance's headlights following, creating twin tunnels of light through the darkness. The going was painfully slow. The snow on the road was nearly knee-deep in places, and the tractor had to force its way through like a ship breaking ice. Every few minutes, Mike would stop and wait for the ambulance to catch up. The wind had shifted direction now, blowing directly into his face. Ice formed on his eyebrows and the edges of his wool hat. After nearly 30 minutes of this grueling progress, they had covered less than a mile. Mike's hands were so cold he could barely feel the steering wheel anymore. The temperature seemed to be dropping even further, if that was possible. He glanced back at the ambulance and saw Lisa in the passenger seat, giving him a thumbs up to keep going. Suddenly, the tractor's front wheel dropped into an unseen pothole, jolting Mike nearly out of his seat. The engine sputtered and coughed. For a heart-stopping moment, he thought it might die. He adjusted the choke, whispering encouragement to the old machine. Come on, girl. Don't quit on me now. The engine caught again, but sounded rougher than before. Something wasn't right. Mike pressed on, knowing they couldn't afford to stop. Another quarter-mile passed, each yard a victory against the elements. Then it happened. A loud bang came from somewhere in the tractor's engine, followed by a plume of smoke. The machine lurched, then began to slow despite Mike's foot pressing the gas pedal to the floor. No, 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 he muttered, desperately working the controls. But it was no use. The tractor rolled to a stop, steam rising from under its hood to mix with the falling snow. Mike jumped down into a drift that came up to his thighs. He waved frantically at the ambulance, motioning for them to stop. David rolled down his window as they pulled alongside. "Engine's blown," Mike shouted over the storm. "Can't go any further." David's face fell. "How far to the highway?" "Still about a mile," Mike said, looking ahead into the seemingly endless white. "But I think I can see lights up there. Might be road crews." Lisa leaned across from the passenger seat. "We can't just sit here. Walter won't last." Mike looked at the ambulance, then back to the distant lights. A mile through waist-deep snow in a blizzard was practically a death sentence. But staying put might mean death for Walter too. Mike made his decision. "You two stay with Walter, keep him warm, I'll go for help." "You can't go alone," Lisa protested. "It's suicide in this weather." "I know these roads better than anyone," Mike insisted. "If those are plows up ahead, I can bring them back. If not, I'll find someone who can help." Before they could argue further, Mike grabbed a flashlight from the tractor and set off into the storm. The snow was deeper than he expected, each step a struggle. The wind pushed against him like a physical barrier, trying to force him back. Within minutes, the ambulance's lights were just a dim glow behind him. Mike focused on the lights ahead, using them as a beacon. His world narrowed to just the next step, then the next. His legs burned with effort and his lungs ached from the cold air. Time seemed to stretch and warp. Had he been walking for minutes or hours? The lights ahead didn't seem to be getting any closer. Just when he thought he couldn't go any further, his foot struck something hard and smooth beneath the snow. Pavement. He had reached the highway. Mike pushed forward with renewed determination. The lights were definitely closer now, and he could make out the shape of large vehicles. Snowplows, 3 of them, working in tandem to clear the highway. Mike waved, his flashlight frantically stumbling toward them through the snow drifts that lined the cleared road. The lead plow driver spotted him and stopped, jumping down from his cab with a look of shock on his face. "What in God's name are you doing out here?" the driver asked, helping Mike toward the warmth of his vehicle. Through chattering teeth, Mike explained about the ambulance and Walter. The driver, a burly man with kind eyes, immediately got on his radio to call for backup. Within minutes, a plan was formed. 2 plows would go back with Mike to clear a path for the ambulance, while the 3rd would continue ahead to alert the hospital. As Mike climbed into the warm cab of the lead plow, exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him. His clothes were frozen stiff and he could no longer feel his feet. But for the first time in hours, he felt something else too. Hope. The next morning dawned clear and blindingly bright. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind a transformed world of pristine white. The sun reflected off the snow with such intensity that it hurt the eyes to look directly at it. Mike woke up in an uncomfortable plastic chair in the hospital waiting room. His neck was stiff, and his muscles ached from the previous night's ordeal. A nurse with kind eyes and gray-streaked hair was gently shaking his shoulder. "Mr. Taylor, you fell asleep. Would you like some coffee?" Mike straightened up, wincing at the pain in his back. His clothes were still damp from the melted snow, and he smelled like diesel fuel and sweat. "How's Walter doing?" he asked, his voice rough from sleep. The nurse smiled. "He made it through the night. The doctors say he's stable now. They performed an emergency procedure when he arrived, and it looks like he's going to recover." Relief washed over Mike like a warm wave. After they had reached the ambulance with the snow plows, everything had happened in a blur. The road crew had cleared a path and the ambulance had followed them to the hospital with sirens blaring. Mike had insisted on coming along, unwilling to abandon Walter after everything they'd been through. "His family is with him now," the nurse continued. "They've been asking about you. They want to thank you personally." Mike shook his head. "No need for thanks. Just did what needed doing." "What you did was extraordinary," the nurse corrected him gently. "Not many people would have stayed open during that storm, let alone gone to such lengths to help strangers." Mike accepted the steaming cup of coffee she offered. His hands were still red and chapped from the cold, but at least he could feel them now. The hospital had wanted to admit him for observation, concerned about frostbite and hypothermia, but he had refused. There was nothing wrong with him that a hot shower and a good meal wouldn't fix. "Can I use your phone?" he asked the nurse. "Mine died during the night and I need to check on my diner." She handed him the phone from the reception desk and Mike dialed his longtime employee, Rosie. She answered on the first ring, as if she'd been waiting by the phone. "Mike Taylor, is that you? Where on earth have you been? I've been worried sick. The sheriff came by looking for you this morning." Mike smiled at the concern in her voice. "I'm fine, Rosie. I'm at County General Hospital. It's a long story." "The whole town's talking about it," Rosie interrupted. "Lisa's brother works at the fire station. He told everybody how you saved that ambulance and then walked through the blizzard to flag down help. They're calling you a hero." Mike felt his face grow warm. "That's not necessary. How's the diner? Any damage from the storm?" "The diner's fine," Rosie assured him. "Power came back on about an hour ago. Tom from next door helped me shovel the walkway. When are you coming back?" "Soon as I can get a ride," Mike said. "My truck's still at the diner and I think my tractor might be buried in a snowdrift somewhere on County Road 8. "Don't you worry about that," Rosie said firmly. "I'll send my son to pick you up. And the Miller boys already went out looking for your tractor. They'll tow it back to the shop." Mike felt a lump form in his throat. The people in this town had always looked out for each other, but sometimes it still took him by surprise. "Thanks, Rosie. I'll see you soon." After hanging up, Mike finished his coffee and stood up, stretching his sore muscles. The nurse had disappeared down the hall, so he decided to find the restroom and at least wash his face before Rosie's son arrived. As he passed by the ICU waiting area, a woman in her 50s with Walter's same gray eyes spotted him. She rose quickly from her chair. "Are you Mike, the diner owner?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. Mike nodded, suddenly self-conscious about his disheveled appearance. Without warning, the woman threw her arms around him in a tight hug. "Thank you," she whispered against his shoulder. "Thank you for saving my father." More family members gathered around. Walter's son, his grandchildren, even a great-grandchild barely old enough to walk. They all wanted to shake his hand, to touch the man who had helped save their loved one. They told him that Walter had woken up briefly and asked about the man with the tractor. The doctor said that without Mike's quick thinking and determination, Walter wouldn't have made it through the night. Mike accepted their gratitude awkwardly, insisting that the paramedics were the real heroes. He was just a diner owner who happened to be in the right place at the right time. But the family wouldn't hear of it. To them, he was nothing short of a guardian angel. By the time Rosie's son arrived to drive him home, Mike was exhausted all over again, drained by the emotional weight of the morning. He dozed in the passenger seat as they drove through the snow-covered landscape back to Pine Ridge. The town looked like something from a Christmas card, with snow piled high on rooftops and icicles hanging from every eave. People were out shoveling driveways and helping neighbors dig out cars. A few children had already built a snowman in the town square. As they pulled up to the Crossroads Diner, Mike was surprised to see several cars in the parking lot. Rosie had told him she would open up, but he hadn't expected many customers on the day after such a massive storm. "Looks like you've got a busy day ahead," Rosie's son commented as he put the truck in park. Mike nodded, reaching for the door handle. Nothing makes people hungry like shoveling snow. Inside, the diner was warm and filled with the familiar smells of coffee and bacon. Rosie was behind the counter, pouring coffee for a table of snowplow drivers, the same men who had helped Mike the night before. They raised their cups in salute when they saw him. "There he is," one of them called out. "Man of the hour." Mike shook his head, embarrassed by the attention, but made his way over to thank them properly for their help. As he moved through the diner, customers patted his back and offered words of praise. News traveled fast in a small town. Rosie handed him a fresh mug of coffee. "You look terrible," she said bluntly, but her eyes were kind. "Go clean up. I've got things covered out here." Mike nodded gratefully and headed toward his small office in the back where he kept a change of clothes. As he passed the windows facing the parking lot, he paused. More cars were pulling in, filling spaces that had just been cleared of snow. He recognized the sheriff's cruiser, and behind it, a van from the local news station. "What in the world?" he murmured. Rosie appeared at his side, wiping her hands on her apron. "Forgot to mention, the story got picked up by the regional news. That reporter is here to interview you about what happened." Mike groaned. All he wanted was a hot shower and a few hours of sleep in his own bed. "Can't you tell them to come? Back tomorrow?" Rosie fixed him with a stern look. "Michael Taylor, those people out there want to thank you for what you did. You're going to let them, even if it makes you uncomfortable. Some things are more important than being modest." Mike knew better than to argue when Rosie used his full name. He sighed, straightened his shoulders, and turned toward the door just as the bell jingled to announce new arrivals. The diner was about to get a whole lot busier. But as Mike looked around at the familiar surroundings, the worn counter, the humming coffee machines, the booths where countless conversations had taken place over the years, he felt something settle in his chest. This place had always been more than just a business to him. It was a haven, a crossroads where lives intersected. Last night, that simple truth had saved a man's life. 2 days after the blizzard, life in Pine Ridge was slowly returning to normal. The main streets had been cleared, power was fully restored, and most businesses had reopened. At the Crossroads Diner, Mike had spent the morning making his famous buttermilk pancakes and catching up with regular customers eager to hear his first-hand account of the rescue. Despite his reluctance to talk about it, the story had taken on a life of its own. The local newspaper had run a front-page article with the headline, "Local Hero Braves Blizzard to Save Stranger's Life." The regional news segment had aired the previous evening, featuring interviews with the paramedics and one of the snowplow drivers. Mike had watched it at home, cringing every time his name was mentioned. "You'll get used to being famous," Rosie teased as she refilled the napkin dispensers. "Maybe we should rename the place Hero's Diner." Mike shook his head, smiling, despite himself. "The day we change anything about this place is the day I hang up my apron for good." Around noon, Mike noticed the lunch crowd was lighter than usual. Strange, considering it was Friday, typically one of their busiest days. He mentioned it to Rosie, who just shrugged mysteriously and said something about the roads still being bad in some areas. By 2 o'clock, the diner was nearly empty. Mike used the lull to catch up on paperwork in his office. The events of the past few days had left him behind on orders and bills. He was deep in concentration when Rosie knocked on his door. "Mike, you better come out here. There's something you should see." There was an odd note in her voice that made Mike look up sharply. "Problem?" "Not exactly," she said, her mouth twitching as if she was trying not to smile. "Just come look." Mike followed her to the front of the diner, puzzled by her behavior. As he approached the large windows overlooking the parking lot, he stopped in his tracks, mouth falling open in shock. A line of vehicles stretched from his parking lot all the way down the county road: SUVs, pickup trucks, minivans, and cars of every description. As he watched, more turned in from the highway, joining the procession. "What in the world?" Mike muttered, pressing closer to the window. Rosie was definitely smiling now. "Turns out Walter Green isn't just some random old man. He's been the high school principal here for over 30 years. Coached the baseball team to state championships 3 times. Started the college scholarship fund for local kids. His family's lived in this county since before the Civil War." Mike turned to her, confused. "But what's all this?" Before Rosie could answer, the bell above the door jingled. A tall man in a sheriff's uniform stepped inside, removing his hat as he approached Mike. "Sheriff Tom," Mike greeted him. "What's going on out there?" The sheriff grinned. "Well, when folks heard what you did for old Mr. Green, they wanted to show their appreciation. Started as just a few families planning to come eat lunch here today. Then Walter's former students got involved. Then the church groups. Then the folks from neighboring towns heard about it." He gestured to the growing line of vehicles. "I'd say half the county's planning to eat at your diner today." Mike's heart seemed to skip a beat. "Half the county? We can't serve that many people. We'll run out of food." "Already taken care of," Rosie said smugly. I called our suppliers yesterday. Got triple our usual order. Your friend Joe from the butcher shop is bringing extra meat. The Miller farm sent over 4 crates of eggs and all the fresh produce we could use. Even got the high school cooking class helping in the back. Mike stared at her in disbelief. You knew about this? Helped organize it, she admitted, not looking the least bit apologetic. Now go wash up and put on a clean shirt. The mayor's coming too. The next few hours passed in a blur. The diner, which normally seated 60 people comfortably, somehow managed to serve over 300. People waited patiently in their cars until space became available. They squeezed into booths, shared tables with strangers, and stood along the walls eating off paper plates when the regular dishes ran out. Mike moved through the crowd in a daze, shaking hands, accepting thanks, and hearing story after story about Walter Green and what he meant to the community. The elderly man's family was there too, taking up a large corner table, bringing Mike over to meet each new relative as they arrived. The biggest surprise came when the door opened around 5 o'clock, and a thin, elderly man in a wheelchair was carefully guided in by nurses from the hospital. The diner fell silent as Walter Green himself was wheeled to the center of the room. Though still pale and clearly weakened by his ordeal, Walter's eyes were bright and alert as they found Mike in the crowd. He extended a trembling hand. So you're the man who saved my life, he said in a voice that, despite its frailty, carried the authority of someone used to addressing auditoriums full of teenagers. They tell me I wouldn't be here if not for you. Mike took the older man's hand carefully. Just did what anyone would do, sir. Walter's grip tightened surprisingly. No, son. What you did is what we hope anyone would do, but few actually would. You put a stranger's life above your own comfort and safety. He glanced around at the packed diner. Clearly, I'm not the only one who thinks that deserves recognition. Someone started clapping, and within seconds the entire diner erupted in applause. Mike felt his face grow hot with embarrassment, but Walter kept hold of his hand, forcing him to stand there and accept the community's gratitude. When the applause finally died down, the mayor stepped forward with a plaque declaring Mike Taylor an honorary citizen of the year. The high school band squeezed in near the entrance, played a slightly off-key but enthusiastic rendition of For He's a Jolly Good Fellow. Someone had even made a banner that hung across the back wall. Our hero makes the best pancakes too. As the celebration continued, Mike found a quiet moment to slip away to his office for a breather. He sat heavily in his chair, overwhelmed by the day's events. On his desk sat a pile of unpaid bills that had been worrying him for weeks. The diner had been struggling lately, with the new fast food place on the highway drawing away customers. He'd been considering letting Rosie go to cut costs, something that would have broken his heart. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Walter's son, a middle-aged man with his father's same steady gaze. Dad's getting tired, so we're taking him back to the hospital, he said. But he wanted me to give you this. He handed Mike an envelope. What's this? Mike asked, turning it over in his hands. Just a little something to say thanks, Dad insisted. After the man left, Mike opened the envelope. Inside was a check with a number that made his eyes widen, along with a note in shaky handwriting. 4 repairs to your tractor, and maybe a few other things, no arguments. Walter. Mike sat staring at the check for a long time. It was enough to cover all his outstanding bills and then some. Enough to keep the diner going through the quiet winter months. Enough to make some of the renovations he'd been putting off for years. When he finally returned to the main dining room, the crowd had thinned somewhat, but the atmosphere remained festive. Rosie was directing a group of volunteers who had stayed to help clean up. Several local business owners were deep in conversation at the counter, and they waved Mike over. We've been talking, said the hardware store owner, about how we can all support each other better through the winter. Maybe set up a regular business lunch here every Thursday. Good for you, good for us, good for the town. Mike nodded, a lump forming in his throat. I'd like that. As the evening wound down and the last customers departed, Mike stood in the doorway of his diner, looking out at the now empty parking lot. The sky was clear, stars shining brightly in the cold night air, In the distance, he could see the spot where the ambulance had gotten stuck during the blizzard, now just an ordinary stretch of road. He thought about how close he had come to closing early that night, how easy it would have been to go home before the storm hit, how different things might have turned out. Sometimes the smallest choices made the biggest difference. Behind him, Rosie turned the sign in the window from open to closed. "Quite a day," she said, coming to stand beside him. Mike nodded, too full of emotion to speak. "Worth staying open during that blizzard, wasn't it?" she added with a knowing smile. "Yeah," Mike replied softly, looking out at the town that had shown up to support him just as he had supported them. "It really was."